Hi everyone, welcome to this YouTube Live, where we're excited to share with you the next step on Katana's USD and Hydra journey. I'm Gary Jones, a Senior Product Manager here at Foundry, and I'm fortunate enough to have with me Ruth Hutton, a Senior Content and Creative Specialist, who has prepared an overview of the main features and workflows of Katana 8.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here, really excited to be presenting the new features, and I hope you'll enjoy the presentation.
The presentation itself is recorded, during which time we'll be in the chat to answer any questions, and if there's any bigger topics, we'll be joining you on video after the presentation for a more interactive Q&A. You won't want to miss that. So without further ado, on with the show.
Hi everyone, thank you all so much for joining us today. In this presentation, I'll be covering all the features and enhancements that have gone into this release and how they can be incorporated into your look dev and lighting workflows. So first of all, I'm going to give an overview of all of the features before jumping into Katana and showing them all off in action. So let's jump in. So this release continues Katana's USD journey, bringing you an expanded node set which allows you to do a lot more with USD natively inside Katana. And as well as all the USD-based features and enhancements, we've also included some performance improvements and debugging tools, which really help to make sure that you're consistently working quickly with minimal slowdowns and able to identify any issues as quick as possible. We've also upgraded to the VFX Reference Platform 2024 for the Katana 8 release, but this was a dual release, so we also brought out the 7.5 version with exactly the same feature set, but remaining on VFX Reference Platform 2023. So jumping into the updates in the USD space. So you may know that Katana 7 brought you a USD to Katana conversion. Well, Katana 8 completes that round tripping by bringing a Katana to USD node. So you can now convert to and from USD whenever you need to. This means that any workflows that are not yet supported on the Katana or the USD side can still be accomplished by utilizing this conversion. We've also introduced the exporting of USD layers and stages, which makes it even easier to share your data throughout the pipeline and with other artists and other studios. It's also really useful for creating bake points for optimization purposes in your Katana scenes. And this release also brings us a step closer to a full native USD lighting solution with the UsdLight node. This is the first step towards a USD gaffer style lighting solution. So you can create USD lights natively, but we are working on a full feature set for this. USD collections are now also supported, so you can create your collections natively in USD and view them in a new panel which has been introduced to the Scene Explorer. We've also added a working set to allow you to enable and disable certain collections, so you can really have control over which are visible in the collections panel. And we've also added pattern-based collection support to certain node parameters where a prim path might be specified. So this is very similar to Katana's cell parameters that you might be familiar with. So you'll often have the option to select a path or use cell, which allows you to use make use of USD's pattern-based collections. So overall, the USD node set's been expanded with 13 new nodes being added. The other nodes that have been introduced allow you to create USD cameras, X-forms and scopes, make native USD material assignments, make any transformation edits, change the kind, and set up stage-specific parameters such as your project directory that nodes downstream will be able to utilize. So jumping into the performance and debugging side, we've introduced a USD text view, so you can view your USD layers or even your complete stage from any point in the node graph, and this will be determined based on the selected node. So this is really useful for understanding what's going on in USD as you're building up your scene and also identifying any potential issues. We've also added a Python profiler option to the performance tab. So this allows you to start a profiling session and perform any operations and then analyze that data to identify where any slowdowns might be coming from. This Katana version also sees 2.5 times better performance, which is reflected in live renders when you're making parameter or frame or graph state variable changes, and this is in comparison to Katana 6.5. So overall, you're able to work a lot more quickly when working with live renders and making changes within your scene. And we've also made some really nice UI updates in the Scene Explorer for different types of prim types, and added more information to the Attributes tab. So the Scene Explorer now has visualization for different prims. So we've got purple for abstract prims, a dash line for instant proxies, strike through for inactive prims, and then faded text for any over specifiers. And this makes it really easy at a first glance what's going on in your scene. And in the Attributes tab, we've added metadata, so you can now view the prims, selected prims metadata for a much better understanding of your scene. And there's also an M next to certain attributes and relationships that can be clicked to show the attribute and relationship metadata. So that's a brief overview of what's been added to Katana 8. So now let's jump in and have a look at how these tools can be utilized. Before we start, I just want to mention the assets I'm using for this demo are from a short film called We Hunt Giants, and were created and provided by Andreas Feertz. I definitely recommend checking out the full film on YouTube. At the end, I'm also going to be jumping into a scene from a project called Azurus, which was created and provided by Black Sun Entertainment and Altered FX. Again, a really cool project if you want to check it out. So starting on the look development side, here I have a look dev scene for a T-Rex character, all set up, and the materials for the character are already set up as well inside a network material create. So I can use the Katana to USD node to convert these materials across to USD so that I can assign them to the USD meshes. So just to point out that there are plans to have a full native USD material creation workflow. However, for now, this method and this node provides a way for assigning and baking your materials using USD before the complete toolset is available. So just before I demonstrate this, some of you may have noticed that the node creation menu has been updated slightly in the way that you can search. So you can now use letters or words anywhere within the node name and they will be found from the menu, as opposed to before where you would have to start from the beginning of the node name or use the asterisk to search within it. So this is a really helpful update, something that I'm personally very happy about, and it just makes finding nodes that you may not know the exact name of a lot more quick and easy. Cool, so now that I've dropped down the Katana to USD node, I can specify which locations I want to convert over. And this can be the entire scene, so everything from root, bearing in mind that this will convert everything that is upstream, so anything created downstream, like my look dev scene, and any materials downstream won't be converted over. Or I can specify specific locations. So in this case, I just want to convert over my materials. So I can just drag the material location across. And again, these materials here have been created downstream, so they won't be converted, but that's fine. That's exactly what I want. I just have my T-Rex materials that have been converted over. And I can now add a path as well where I want these materials to be placed on the USD side. So by default, they're just placed under the /root location, but I would like them to live under my char T-Rex location to keep everything under that parent level. And I can also change the prim specifier at this point as well. This location has already been defined upstream when I was bringing in my asset, so there's no need to define it now, but if you did want to create a new location, then you can change the specifier to define here as well. And by default, the locations are pruned and removed from the Katana side, but you can also untick this to keep the locations on both sides if you want to. And there's some other options here as well. For example, we have, you can specify locations to ignore. So if you wanted to ignore any parts from within the location that's specified, and also some other options about how specific elements in the scene are converted over. For example, there's an option to disable the mesh conversion, which can be really helpful if you just wanted to bring over things like the material bindings without the actual mesh. So a lot of different options to help you specify how and what should be converted. I'm just going to leave all these options as default because this is exactly what I need to just bring those materials over to USD so that I can assign them and then eventually export them out all as USD. So before doing that, I'm also going to make use of the USD collection node. And the USD collection node is very similar to the usual collection create node on Katana side, where you can add a number of scene graph locations to a collection that then you can use, you can reference downstream in the future for things like material assignments. And this node can also be used to edit collections that are already in the scene. So for example, if you have collections that have been brought in with a USD layer, then you can use the edit action to make any necessary edits to that collection. So the first thing to do here is to set the prim path for the location that I want the collection to live under. So in this case, I want this collection to be underneath my child T-Rex location. So I'll just click and drag that over. And then if we have a look over in the Scene Explorer, you can see we have a new collections working set. And this shows any collections that exist under a specific location. So if I add a collection name here, for example, skin, then you can see that the symbol will appear to show that there is a collection under this location. We also have a new collections panel in the Scene Explorer, which you can enable and disable next to the USD and Katana toggles. And this will display all the collections in the scene once they're enabled in the collections working set. So you can enable these in the usual way by clicking the icon under the working set or right-clicking and choosing the option. And so this panel is a really nice way of keeping all of your collections separate from the rest of the scene tree. And the working set is a nice way of really controlling which collections you have visible in the panel. So if you end up with hundreds of collections in your scene, then you can make sure you're only viewing the necessary ones. Cool, so that's where your collections live. Let's add some prim paths to that collection. So if we have a look in the USD collection parameters, there's a couple of ways to start adding prim paths. So the first way is to use the includes and excludes parameters. And the second way would be to use membership expressions. But it's important to remember that you can't use both of them together. They're designed to be used separately. So the includes and excludes option allows you to add paths that you want to include in the collection and then any paths that you may want to exclude. Membership expressions are a slightly newer workflow within USD. And because of this, there's still some limitations where it's still being developed. But overall, it's designed to offer a more powerful way to make prim path selections through the use of USD's pattern-based collections. And as I mentioned in the intro, pattern-based collections are very similar to Katana's cell option. So if I click the Add Statements button, you can see that we have the same options as you'd expect from cell, where it offers paths, collections, and custom. The custom option will allow you to make use of USD's pattern-based collections. You can use expressions to make selections based on things like naming conventions or prim types or kind, or if the prim paths have specific attributes. And you can find more details on these expressions in the USD documentation. Cool, so I'm creating this specific collection for the T-Rex skin. So I'm going to use the syntax, which is going to collect everything underneath this location that contains the word body, because this will give me the selection for the body mesh that I want. And I can check this is working by using the Select in Scene Explorer option, and that's doing as I want it to. So I'm just going to use a group stack to create a few more collections for each of the different materials for the T-Rex character. Cool, and once all of these are set up, And we can make sure that the correct locations are being selected using the Select in Scene Explorer option from within the collections parameters. But we can also right click on the collection inside the panel and choose Collect and Select for each of these, and just make sure that the correct mesh and the correct locations are being selected for each one. And it looks like that's all set up and working as expected. So now our collections are all set up, we can start setting up the material assignments for our converted materials. And these assignments, or bindings in USD terms, can be done natively in Katana as of this release, so in Katana 7.5 and 8. And again, it's a very similar workflow to the regular material assign workflow, where you input a path for the location you want to assign a material to, and then the path to the material. And this is one of those nodes where pattern-based collections is an option, so you can choose between paths and pattern-based collections at the top here, in a similar way to how you would choose cell from a drop-down inside Katana nodes. So if you select pattern-based collection, then you'll have the same add statements button as we looked at for the membership expression parameter. So you'll be able to choose whether you want a path, a collection, or a custom. So this whole workflow should feel fairly familiar for those of you that are used to working with material assign nodes. So there's a couple of different ways to make assignments to USD collections with this node. The first one would be to use the collections option here. So we could just click and drag a collection from our panel, and that will input the collection here. We can also middle mouse click and drag directly to the add statements button, and that will automatically populate as a collection. This method will process the prim paths within the collection, and then the material will be bound to each individual path. So let's just add the correct material here to demonstrate that. So under the material assign, I'll add the clause material. And then if I select the clause mesh, then we can see that we have our material binding underneath the clause. The second option would be to use the assign to collection tick box. And I'm just going to duplicate this node so that I can demonstrate both. So when this is checked, we'll get a new parameter exposed for the collection name that we want the material to be assigned to. So in this case, we don't want to use a direct path here to the collection itself. Instead, we just want a path to the location where the collection lives, which would be our child T-Rex location. And then I can add a name of the collection here. So I'll write clause. And what this is doing now is assigning the material to the collection itself, rather than resolving the paths and assigning to each individual one. So again, we can verify this by looking in the attributes for the child T-Rex location this time. And we can see here that there is a binding to a collection. And we have the collection and the material paths here. And we could also use the new USD text view tab to see the difference in the USD data between these two methods. So this tab allows us to analyze the USD for any selected node or the entire stage up until the selected node. So first, if I disable this and then re-enable this one, then we can see that the binding is made directly to the clause prim. And then if we have a look at the other method, then this shows that the material binding is applied to the collection. So both of these are valid workflows for making assignments to collections. There may be cases where one might be better than the other, but in this case, the result would be the same. So I'm just going to stick with the first one here. And I'll just create another group stack and add the rest of the material assignments for the other collections and materials. Cool, so now that we've made all of our assignments, we can go through our different meshes and just make sure that the correct material bindings have been made here. So for the body, the claws, we don't have a material assignment for the eyes. So I have a feeling that I have set the collection up wrong. Let's just have a look inside the eyes collection. So for the expression, this needs to be inner. There we go. That's working properly now. So if I jump back to my attributes. Cool, that is working properly. And then the eye membrane, and then the upper teeth, the lower teeth, and the tongue. So all of our material bindings are now set up nicely. And we can check this by having a look at the RenderMan rendered delegate. So if I just turn off basic material, then we can see that the materials have all been assigned correctly. So using the delegate, this is a really nice way just to check that things are working as expected without actually having to send off for a render. But of course, if I just turn these back off, we can also set off a render as well. And there's a couple of things I want to do as well just before we bake out these materials. But it's a good idea just to set off the render just to make sure that things are looking and working as expected. Perfect. And so the materials have been applied to the asset. We can really verify that those bindings and the material conversion has all worked really nicely. Cool, so something that I wanted to demonstrate quickly before moving on to bake this out is that you can use the USD schema set nodes to access different APIs parameters. So this node isn't new to this release. It was introduced in the 6.5 and 7 releases, but it's good to know in this context. So I just wanted to show it quickly. There's a lot of different APIs that you can access here. The ones we're going to look at are the Pixar related ones. And there's a few here that allow you to access parameters that would usually be manipulated through the PRMan object statements node, but that cannot be used with USD locations. So for example, we can use the Pixar primvars API. And using this, we can access the displacement bound. So I'm just going to use this to increase the displacement bound sphere parameter because the material has displacement. And then I'm just going to duplicate this. And we can also use the Pixar attributes API to access the trace parameters. And so using this, I can increase the max diffuse and max specular depth, again, for my asset. And this is useful for things like the eye membrane or any materials that have some sort of transparency. So I'll just rename these. And then I'll just set off another render just to make sure, again, that this is all set up nicely. Cool, so that is looking good. So now that the materials are all assigned, and once I'm happy with the look of the materials, then this is all ready to export out as a look layer to hand over to lighting. And the USD layer export node has been introduced to do just this. So this allows for layer and stage exporting, not just for materials, but also geometry, transformations, lights, cameras, and other USD data that you might want to export out of Katana. And the node works in a very similar way to the look file bake and the USD material bake nodes that you might already be familiar with, where it takes two inputs and takes the difference between these 2 points in the node graph as the information to bake out. So I'm going to place this node below my schema nodes, and I want to make sure that the second input is linking up to the tree. And I'm going to keep this node in line with the rest of the node network. Now this is slightly different to where you would place a look file bake node where it might be off to the side. But the reason being is that this node has a really nice option to allow you to use the exported file instead of the nodes that we're exporting. And so if it's all linked up, then it means you don't have to relink the node network to be able to make use of that. And I'll demonstrate that workflow in a moment. So here I want to be exporting my materials, the assignments, the collections as well, and my displacement and trace parameters that I've set using the USD schema set nodes. If you needed to, if you had a particularly heavy material network, it might also be a good idea to just export the materials themselves and bring them back into Katana for the purpose of optimization. So this first input, as usual, would need to connect up above everything that I want to bake out, but slightly different workflow here. We will need to use a USD layer define node to define the point that we want to bake from. So I'll just place this above the collection stack. Now this node acts as a bit of a starting point. So the node will look up the branch until it hits a USD layer define, and then that will be the point where it knows where to bake from. And again, this can be placed either in line with the nodes or it could be placed off to the side, but I'm going to keep it in line to keep everything tidy for now. And I'll just connect this up, adding a few dot nodes here to keep everything nice and neat. And this USD layer define node, if you look at the parameters, it can also be used to specify an existing baked USD layer. And if a layer is specified here, then the baked results will be combined with the specified layer. Whereas if nothing is specified in here, then everything will be baked out as overs. So for example, if you imported a stage and then made some transformations inside Katana, you could then specify the stage and bake out a new version which would combine the new transformations as well as the existing stage, so that you can replace the entire stage with that new file. Otherwise, just the transformations will be baked out. Cool, so let's take a better look at the USD layer export parameters. So we have the save directory where this layer should be exported to. We have different USD file formats that we can choose from. If there's animation that we want to bake, we can specify the frame range here, as well as how the composition arcs are exported and whether they're flattened. We also have some other metadata options for really refining how the information is baked out of Katana. And we have that useful use exported option, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. So let's add the path that we want to bake to. And I'm going to bake it out as a USDA file so that I'll be able to have a look inside the file after and see exactly what's been written out. And once that's done, we can just click export. There'll be a dialog. It disappeared very quickly, but with slightly heavier scenes, there'll be a dialog there to show that it's exporting. And once that disappears, it will be all baked out. So now that we have our file exported, I can use that really useful use exported tick box. And you can see that when this is checked, there's some visual indication in the node graph to show that that baked out USD layer is being used. So first of all, on the USD layer export node, the symbol will be yellow to show that the exported layer is active. Also, if you have the dim nodes not contributing to viewed node selected, this is a really nice option and a really nice visual indication to show which nodes are being used. So when this is ticked, you can see that all of those nodes are being bypassed. And we can double check that everything is still working as expected by selecting any of the meshes and making sure that that material binding is still intact. And I'll also set off another render just so that we can visually check that everything is looking correct. So we can see here that that baked USD file has all the information that we need. All of our materials and bindings have been baked out correctly. We can also take a look inside the baked out USDA file and just check what's being exported. So here we can see that all of our collections are being exported, as well as the attributes that we set using the USD schema set nodes. We have all of our materials, and at the bottom we should have our bindings as well. So just before we jump over to the lighting side of things, I just want to show you the USD layer export group. So I'm just going to delete this setup here. reconnect this. So the USD layer export group is a new node that basically does the same thing as the USD layer export and the USD layer define, but it's a macro that's been set up to connect these nodes up in your node graph automatically. So the best way to use it would be to highlight the nodes that you want to export and then go to Edit and collapse selected nodes to USD layer export group. And this will collapse all the nodes down. And if you jump inside the group, you can see that the USD layer export and the USD layer define have been connected up automatically in the same way that we just set it up manually. And the handy thing here is that the parameters for both those nodes can be accessed from the group parameters. So here we have the layer define asset parameter, and then under here we have all of the export parameters. And we can still use that use exported checkbox and get the nice visual indication when it is and isn't being used. So both workflows are completely valid. This is a nice way to keep things sort of neat and tidy in the node network, but it really comes down to you and which you prefer to use. Onto the lighting side of things. In this scene, I have my same T-Rex character, and this has been brought in as a payload, and then I've brought the look file in that we baked out from the previous scene in as a reference. And I also have some animation referenced for each shot as well. And I'm just going to use the random and delegate again to check that my materials have been brought in correctly. So if I turn off basic material, then we can see here that the look file's been brought in, and with that animation on top, this is all looking as expected. And I'll just check this for both shots. Perfect, so that is all looking as I expect it to. So I'll just jump back to my first shot here, and I'll switch off the delegate for now, because I don't need it. And again, I can use the USD text view. This time I'll use the full stage at selected node, and I can just view from the look reference. And you can see here that a lot of this has been truncated because it's quite long. So what I can do is I can just disable the T-Rex payload for a second, and then go back to my look. We can see that all the information that was in that USDA file, so my collections, my attributes that I set, so the trace and the displacement bound, as well as my materials and bindings, have all been brought in correctly. So this is all looking good and as we'd expect it to. We can also see over in the Scene Explorer that we have the collections icon under the char T-Rex location. So we can see that our collections have in fact been brought in with that look file, as you can see if I disable and enable it. And we can just double check that they are still working and everything is still sort of intact and as we want it to be. So moving on to the actual lighting workflow side. So lighting artists would usually be using Gaffer 3 nodes to set up the lights in the scene at this point. And because Katana scenes can be set up with a combination of Katana and USD data, you could use Gaffer 3s here, even though a lot of our scene is set up using native USD locations. However, with this release, you can also make use of UsdLight nodes to add your lights in natively. But just to reiterate what I mentioned earlier on, this is the first step towards a full USD lighting toolset in Katana, so it's not the final solution. However, it does allow for the creation, manipulation, and editing of lights right now. So I'll drop down a UsdLight, and this will be for our sequence lighting. And then in the parameters, we can choose a light type here, and I'm just going to choose a Pixar dome light. These light types will be populated based on the renderer that you have loaded in with Katana and their compatibility with USD. So we can see that we have all of the different pixel lights as well as the standard USD lights. And I'm just going to rename this light here. We could also choose a different path for this, but I'm going to leave that as it is and just rename this to Dome Light. And so once we have this light, we should be able to see it in the Scene Explorer and in the viewer as well. And we can use the transform handles to manipulate it in the viewer, because manipulators for USD locations are supported in this release as well. So you can just scale it up. And then I can set off a live render just to make sure that this is all working correctly. So I'm just going to make sure that my live render updates for USD and the Katana side are all working, as I do have some elements of the scene on the Katana side. Cool, and it looks like our light is working. So if I have a look over in the parameters again, we can see that we have all the usual light parameters, so the color, exposure, intensity. So I could increase the intensity, and this will be reflected in the live render. And what I can also do is I have the backdrops imported into the catalog, so I can make use of the monitor's underlay and overlay feature to use the backplate as the underlay, so that I can see it, my render on top of the backplate. Now you can see here that this isn't quite working as expected, and this is because my light is visible in the render, so we're getting the render of the light as well as the render of our T-Rex character. And to fix this, we can do something very similar to what we did in the look dev scene by using a USD schema set node to access the parameters for this light and turn the camera visibility off. So let's jump to my Scene Explorer, and I'll just grab the Dome Light location, and we want the Pixel Attributes API, and then we should be able to find the visibility, and we can just change the camera visibility to 0, and then we can see now that we have the backplate nice and visible, and the light is not actually rendering out. We could also make use of the nuke bridge in this case to have a really nice preview of our render in the context of the comp. So with any sort of grading and any other integration that we might want to do on the comp side. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to use the underlay and overlay features. Cool, so then I can continue to make some changes. So I'm also just going to add in the HDRI into the texture file path here. And we can also change the light color slightly. And I'll just decrease the intensity a little. And I'm not going to spend too much time refining this for the purpose of this demo. So I'll add another light. I'll just drop down another USD light here, and this will be our key light. So this one I'll have it in the same location, and I'll just rename it to key light. And I'll choose a light type. This time I'll choose the Pixel Rec light. And again, we should be able to see this light in the viewer. So if I select it here, I can scale it up. I should be able to see it. And then I can use the transform handles to position it a little bit better in the scene. And then again, we can have a play with the parameters. So if I increase the intensity a little, jump back to the monitor so I can see it in the context of my backplate. And I'm just going to change the color of this light to try and match some of those highlights over here, as this light is coming from the sun. So we sort of want it to match some of these other highlights that we're seeing on the trees, something like that. I'll just make it slightly lighter. And again, I'm not going to worry about refining this too much, just for the purpose of the demo. So I will just leave it as something like that. But again, you can sort of be playing around with these lights as much as needed. So now we have our sequence level lighting, and let's say we're happy with how this is looking. I'll just rename the lights just so that it's really clear. So we have our dome light. And we have our key light. And then for the shot level lighting, it's a very similar workflow to what you'll be used to with the Gaffer 3, where we can have more of these UsdLight nodes downstream, which can then make edits to the lights upstream. So first of all, I'll add our variable switch in, and this can be linked up to the shot graph state variable, which already exists. So I'll enter our shot values here. And then I can add those UsdLight nodes into each stream. And I'll just neaten this up a little bit. So now we have something which is looking very similar to usual inside Katana. And all we need to do is inside the UsdLight parameters is, instead of using a create, we can change this to edit in the same way that we would with the USD collection node. And then we just need to add the prim path for the light that we want to make edits to. So for example, I can drag that key light in, and then this will populate the parameters of the node based on the light that we've input here. So we can now jump in and make changes to this. So for example, I'll just change this quite drastically so we can see that change. Let's make it even more obvious. There we go. So now we've increased that light intensity just for this shot, and we can see that reflected in the render. And then if I switch to my other shot, so you can still make use of the same sort of multi-shot workflows as before, while utilizing USD in your scenes. So I could do the same thing here with this UsdLight. I could change this to edit and then grab that key light. And again, I can do something, some drastic change to the intensity just so that it's super clear, we can see it. And I can also jump into the viewer and make some edits to the light position. So I can move our key light around a little. And again, as well as just being able to see this in renders, I can also make use of RenderMan's delegate here, and this should respond to these lights. Sorry, I just need to uncheck default lighting. There we go. So then we can see the updates as I'm sort of moving the lights around. So this can be a really nice way of initially placing the lights where we want them to be. You can see that it updates a lot more quickly, so we can really see, sort of get initial placement and initial parameters down for these lights without having to set off the render at this point. Cool, so I'll just turn this back to GL for now. I just wanted to demonstrate that again, just because it's quite a nice and powerful way of being able to sort of really preview the things in your scene without needing to necessarily set off a render. So let's imagine that our lighting is finalized. We can really make use of the UsdLight export again to bake out different layers for the purpose of versioning or sharing with other departments and artists. So in this case, this would be quite a similar workflow to how live groups would tend to be used in this context, as it would allow different artists to be working on different levels or different shots through their own USD layer. So for example, we could add these into an export group. This could be exported out as the sequence lighting, and that means it would be able to be really easily versioned and reverted if ever needed, and the lighting can be really easily shared with other departments as well. And as I said, you can also continue working with the Gaffer 3 nodes as you normally would, and then use the Katana to USD node to convert your lights created in Gaffer 3 over to USD, and then you'd be able to bake out the lights as USD layers in the same way, and then use UsdLight to just make any edits, any tweaks or adjustments that might be needed on a per shot basis. So that exporting functionality is really hugely useful. It's made it so easy to share data between different departments, as well as if you're collaborating with other artists or even other studios. It's also a huge benefit when it comes to baking more for optimization purposes. So if I just jump to a more complex scene quickly, you can see that in this scene we have a number more shots, and there's more a larger environment, more characters, more geometry, and generally larger and a bit more complex than the last one. And I also have done the stage setup all within this project. So I've brought in the payloads, referenced the look, and then the layout on top. So all of this is being processed inside Katana at the moment. But what I could do is I could just highlight all this on the sequence side and collapse to the UsdLight export group. And then this could be exported out as the sequence level setup. And I can use the use exporter to bring it back in. And by doing this, we'll have noticeable improvement on the time taken to process the scene and work with it inside Katana. And we could also do exactly the same thing for all of the shot level setups. So again, in this case, I have my shot cameras, all my animation, the characters, the props, and everything that's animated layered on top. So for this, I could also collapse it to a layer export group, export it out, and then that would sit nicely on top of the sequence there. I could make further edits inside Katana, so I could do USD transform edit or USD transform set, make some adjustments, and then I could either export the edits on their own, or I could add these to the layer export group. I can also make use of the layer defines asset parameter and input the previously baked shot layer as well. So there's a huge amount of flexibility with this, a lot of different workflows you can use and follow. And really, when used in combination with all of Katana's existing workflows and features, it really does add a lot and allow you to start moving to USD at your own pace. So just before we finish up, I would really like to mention the example projects. So we have updated these in the latest version. So we've added a lot more projects that ship with Katana. This includes an entire native USD section, which contains example projects for specific nodes, as well as learning USD specific concepts. We also have some full template examples. So for example, we have a full look dev scene example here with a turntable setup, and this is using USD preview surface materials and USD lights. So we can use the AVP to look at the materials and the lights there. So this is a really nice way of sort of visualizing and going over some of the concepts that we went over in the presentation today. We also have the same for lighting. So this is a sort of very simple multi-shot lighting scene, again, where you can dive into a project that's already been set up and it's fully annotated. So hopefully that will give a really nice starting point for people that are wanting to jump in and play with the features. And there's a lot of others here as well. There's some more sort of in-depth examples, some multi-shot projects. We have a native USD multi-shot project, which requires downloadable assets. And outside of USD, we have some other projects, things like template examples for look dev and lighting, again with downloadable assets. So we've really tried to expand on these, and hopefully they will be useful for you. And as I mentioned throughout the demo, Katana is not finished with its USD journey yet. The teams have a lot more exciting plans for future releases, which will provide you with everything you need to complete these workflows. But thank you everyone so much for listening to me. Please do ask any questions that you might have in the chat, and myself, Gary, and the rest of the team will be answering them now. Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed that. I know I did. And so, as Ruth mentioned, this is the Q&A portion where we have an opportunity to answer any of your Katana-related questions, if you have them, of course. I'd like to start the ball rolling with a quick question for Ruth while you have a chance to add your own to the chat. So, Ruth, you've had a chance to play around with Katana 8 a little now in making the video we just watched. What is the biggest difference for you between Katana 7 and 8, and what is your favorite new feature?
I think the most noticeable difference for me was the performance improvement. So just in terms of live rendering and just getting the updates a lot more quickly in the renders. And also, I always love those quality of life improvements that are added in. So I mentioned the node creation menu. And another one I don't think I mentioned is shake to release, which has also been added, which I've been personally asking for a long time. So I'm really pleased about that. And I think on the big feature side, I think the combination of Katana to USD and the USD export is just a really, really powerful feature, especially when they're used together. Because I can sort of been playing around with old Katana scenes and converting them to USD, and it just makes that whole process so easy, and it's super intuitive to use. So yeah, I think that would be the favorites.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ruth. Right. So there was a question earlier on that was regarding debugging some of the exported materials from Maya. Now, there's a number of different paths that you could have taken to bring those in and to use it, and where the actual problems are. So I'm going to step through a couple of workflows that you can try. And of course, if these don't help, or if you can't manage to debug it, you can always reach out to our support, and they will obviously help in any way that they can to be able to debug that for you. So first of all, initially, I would probably be checking the USD8 that actually gets exported from Maya, double checking that it's got the material assignment in there and it seems and looks okay. Another way you could do that is obviously re-importing it into Maya and making sure that it actually just goes back into the same application. You could also debug it outside a DCC by checking it in USD View to make sure that's happening as you would expect to. The next step would be bringing it into Katana and seeing where it starts to fall down, and would start doing that. The big gotcha that a lot of people have when they're starting to utilize the USD side in Katana is they don't have the render delegate attached to Katana, and that's what we rely on for all of our USD information. So you can double check that you've got the render delegate attached by trying to change it in the display dropdown, view dropdown, to make sure that RenderMan or Arnold or whatever renderer you're actually using is actually available in that dropdown, and it's that shows that the render delegate has at least been found. And then the way you debug it depends on which kind of path you're using to bring the actual USD in. We have an older workflow, which is called the USD in, which is still perfectly usable, and a lot of studios are still using it. That's kind of like a black box place where you point it to a USD and it will convert it all to Katana for you. And because it's a little bit one shot, it's a little bit trickier to debug. If you are using that older workflow, I would check the material assign has it there, and if it doesn't, then that's probably where the problem is actually happening, and I just recommend reaching out to support at that point. But if you're using the more native tools that Ruth's been demonstrating today, and you use something like USD sublayer add, you can then start utilizing things like the attributes tab with the various prims to see if it's assigned. You can double check if you're bringing them in separate stages, whether you have so different layers, you can start utilizing things like the new USD text view as a way to make sure that the binding is there and is doing exactly what you think it is, and just stepping through each of the different layers that you might be bringing in. If you can't get it through any of those, then I'd just recommend reaching out to support as I initially started. So hopefully that helps. If not, then yeah, the support is definitely the way to go. I'm going to be pointing you also to another opportunity to like the community towards Discord later on. So if they are still having some problems, they could maybe post on the Discord channel and we can help out on there, or on the community forums on the Foundry website as well. They're all available to you as a way to people to actually maybe help you share that particular problem. So if there's no other Q&A questions, if anyone's not got anything else, we can finish a little bit earlier today. Thank you again, Ruth, for all of your help with the presentation. And thanks everyone for joining us. Really appreciate you taking your time to come and sit with us and go through the presentation. If something occurs to you afterwards, if you do want any extra further engagement, as I mentioned, there's the Katana Discord server for you to join and to connect with the rest of the team. As you can see, the link's already in the chat for that. We also have an ever-growing Foundry Learn website to help you with learning Katana or any of the other products. And we're really fortunate to have another great YouTube live lined up next week, this time for Mary, and it's called Behind the Smart Masks with Stuart Ansley. So I hope to see you there. And from myself, Ruth, and the rest of the Foundry team, take care, and here's to a fantastic 2025.